Yep, got it muted. We're all good. Here we go. Well, good morning, and a beautiful Monday morning it is. We are 3 days away, of course, from Christmas Day, and an early Christmas and Merry Christmas to each and every one of you. It's a wonderful time of the year, celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ, and weather's been great. People have been in a good mood. Man, if you love sports, there's lots going on. I mean, Saturday was like Nirvana, right? So we welcome you. We're going to talk about all this and more. To Dialed In, I'm Tom Brenneman, joined by Luke Brenneman and our producer, Casey McAllister. Our show is presented by UDF and Encore Technologies. We come your way twice a week, live on Mondays, right at 9 o'clock Eastern Time on Chatterbox Sports. We post later in the day on the Believe Network. And then, of course, we're on Thursday at high noon. We will not have a show this Thursday, the day after Christmas, but we will tell you ahead of time that we will be with you a week from today and then a week from Thursday. So we'll be able to preview all the games in the college football playoff on Monday because they play next week. And then we'll be able to recap everything that happened. You can find us on YouTube, the Chatterbox Sports page. You can download us anywhere, anytime. Just search Dialed In with Tom Brenneman, and you're dialed in. Lukey, good morning. How's everything?
It's good. Once again, guys like Casey and myself, we wake up with a little extra juice on a cold
Okay,
winter morning.
okay.
The Bengals
All
are
right.
still alive. The lights are orange. Jamar
Hmm.
Chase is breaking his own franchise record. Joe Burrow's breaking NFL records. The Bengals are hot, guys, and we got the biggest one of the season on Saturday. So we're going to get into more of what has to happen, what doesn't, what needs to be better. But from a Monday morning wake up perspective, especially on winter break, I'm taking another win because it gives me another reason to watch football next weekend. So, hey, survive in advance, right?
All right, all right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the heart is still beating. It's not in great health. It's not in great health. But there is still a beat. There's still life. When the Bengals began this weekend, right? Okay, there was a whole laundry list, checklist of things that had to keep them alive. You needed Denver to lose. Check. They fall to the Chargers. You need to beat the Browns. Check. So far, so good. And we'll recap the game here in a minute. They needed Miami and Indy to lose one more time, each of them, not one or the other, each of them to lose one more time in the final 3 weeks of the season. Both of them, unfortunately, won yesterday. So the Bengals play Denver this Saturday at home. It's a home finale. You start with the fact they have to win. They cannot lose another game, okay? That means beating Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh the final week, and that could be a huge game for Pittsburgh. But they need to beat Denver. Then they need Denver to lose the final game of the season against the Kansas City Chiefs. And they still need that loss from both Indy and Miami. So let's be honest. The prognosis is shaky at best, but as a doctor friend of mine told me recently, you gotta have hope. And we know Casey is all about hope and change. We will talk about the Bengals win yesterday. College football kicked off its first ever 12-team playoff. All four home teams won and won in routes. Notre Dame hammered Indiana Friday night. Then Saturday, Penn State drubs SMU. Texas beats Clemson by a couple of touchdowns. And then, my word, Ohio State. Were they impressive? They look like Ohio State, what we thought Ohio State would be in their blowout of Tennessee. Now, the second round begins a week from Tuesday. So they're waiting to get everything lined up for the traditional New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, that kind of thing, right? Including, basically, it's the Rose Bowl all over again between the Pac 10 and the Big Ten. Ohio State is playing Oregon at the Rose Bowl on New Year's Day. It doesn't get any cooler than that. A lot of great games, but nothing's cooler than that. A lot of whining going on over the weekend. A lot of whining. We'll discuss that. College basketball, X loses at home to Marquette on Saturday. They've dropped 3 straight games, all against ranked teams. And UC wins over number 22 Dayton on Friday night downtown. And then they drilled Grambling yesterday at the shoe to wrap up their non-conference schedule. The Bearcats are 10-1 and will be in the top 15 nationally when the new polls come out today. They launched their Big 12 season at Kansas State a week from tonight. And then Arizona comes to town, the second Big 12 game. Remember, Arizona in the Big 12. Their football team won the Big 12. All right, man, where do you want to start? Let's start with the Bengals and the game itself before we talk about all the other things. Burrow just continues to be unbelievable. Some of the plays, even he admitted after the game in his post-game press conference, the one where he was basically parallel to the ground and still has enough arm strength to fire the ball into the end zone was incredible. Chase did not want to be on the field. He wanted to give a younger player a chance. They're near the end, right? He said, I had no idea about the record where we stood. Burrow said we had no idea about the record. And it just so happens that the coach talked him into coming back in. He comes back in. He catches a touchdown. And when he catches a touchdown, he breaks his own record for receiving yards in a season. A lot of smiling faces in that Bengals locker room afterwards. And we haven't seen a lot of that this year. Luke, your thoughts on the game?
Well, the game itself was really impressive to me because they didn't have their best stuff from what we've seen from the Bengals the last couple of weeks when I really thought they've played complementary football. And I say that in a good way because I said really good teams in the NFL, they find ways to win and they find different ways to win. We've talked about this offensive firepower and how the Bengals plan on scoring 30 on everybody. Realistically, the Bengals scored 17 points in that game. The last touchdown to Chase, the Browns jumped off sides. They didn't even try to get back into the play. The game was well over. It was inside of the final 5 minutes. I mean, give Chase the touchdown, give Chase the yards. We'll take it. Great. But the Bengals offense was pretty much held to 6, maybe 9 points if they end up settling for a field goal there in the final couple minutes instead of the touchdown to Chase in garbage time. And the fact that their offense didn't show up in the second half, they turned the ball over in the red zone, and the defense had their back, and they won a football game in a different way than they've had to grind out or even force like close fourth quarters all season long. I was impressed by that. Granted, it is Dorian Thompson-Robinson, but red zone turnovers are red zone turnovers, and I'm talking about the fumble on the 1-yard line. That is a massive way to start the game. You saw the other touchdown for the Browns, and we've seen plenty of them this year, where guys are on the goal line going untouched. Goal line carries are supposed to be the most physical, relentless, dive at their legs, do everything to get a head on the football. And the Bengals haven't been good in those situations. So to see improvement there causing a turnover, and then in the next series, when it seems like the Browns late into the fourth quarter are really starting to get something going, when you're tipping a ball up, Geno Stone now, what is that, 3 straight games with an interception? It feels like this defense is starting to come together, and maybe it might not be this season, but if we're going to talk about this team making the playoffs and eventually being a Super Bowl team with Joe Burrow, it starts with the defense, realistically. Look at the Kansas City Chiefs. They have the best quarterback in the NFL, and they might have a guy who's on pace to be the best of all time. And the Chiefs have not scored 30 points too many times this season. I think we were looking at it, Ted. It's like maybe once or twice. So you can give all the credit.
The stat that Mike Greenberg put out in a tweet, and I reposted it because for me, and look, we can get into this discussion in another place, another time. But if the Bengals are seriously thinking about T. Higgins and what that's going to do to the payroll, okay, this single stat might make you think differently, okay? 2 things. The Bengals have already broken an NFL record this year of scoring 30 or more points and losing games. Okay, they've broken the all-time record by a team in a single season already this year. The Kansas City Chiefs lost, I believe it was on Christmas Eve last year, to the Raiders. Since then, including the playoffs, they are 19-1. And only twice, and it came on the final play of the game in both of these games, only twice have they scored 30 or more points in a game. They did it to win in overtime a touchdown and kicked a field goal the final play of the game to get to 30. So in regulation, they've not scored 30 points in a game while going 19-1. And yet the Bengals are thinking about going and signing half their team payroll salary cap on 3 offensive players and thinking they can outscore everybody. So go ahead. I didn't mean to take away your thunder there. But when I saw that note, I thought to myself, You have got to be kidding.
No, but
Everybody
that's
talks
exactly what I'm
about
saying.
Mahomes. They're not scoring, and they win every game.
Well, and that's a test. It's not like that's a coincidence. They have a top 5 defense in the NFL. So the fact that they have that option where if the defense doesn't show up, they can put the ball in their guys' hands and say, "Hey, 15, we need you today," and we know what he's capable of. We obviously know Joe Burrow might have a higher ceiling than him when it really comes down to it, because some of the throws that he is consistently making this season is even better than the peak Joe Burrow we thought we were
Yep.
past in our Super Bowl run AFC era. I mean, you and I looked at each other yesterday and we're like, he's starting to do this consistently. I mean, if you really
Yep.
look back, it was like he would do it against the Chiefs, or he always showed up in those really big games when everyone was watching and got all this hype and craze. He is doing it on a week in and week out basis. The turnovers do need to get cleaned up, but nonetheless, another win. This was one you had to win. I mean, you're 9-point favorites, but it does make you scratch your head. You were 9-point favorites in week 1 against New England. You have to take care of business in these games. They found a way to do it. It wasn't the prettiest it's been all year, but you survived yet again another week. I would have loved for Indianapolis to maybe choke like they did the week prior. Maybe Miami lose to a pretty 50-50 49ers team at home, but Bengals get no help. That's how it is. We never get any help here in Cincinnati, but we're going to need a lot next week and hopefully the week after if we're still
Well, I'll
alive.
tell you one thing I'm tired of hearing about, and you just dropped it again. We never get any help. I'll tell you one thing on social media. I'm so tired of reading about the officials. I mean, my God, Bengal fans, at least some of them, and they're the minority, they think the Bengals are getting screwed every time you turn around. It's so tiresome to read it over and over and over again. Oh my God, Mahomes gets calls. Oh my God, this guy gets calls. Joe never gets these calls. I mean, come on. All right, Casey, your thoughts on the game and your thoughts of where everything stands at this point in time, because you and Luke are the optimists.
Yeah, they handled their business, and that's exactly what we expected out of this team. Browns are basically packing it in for the season, and they showed it on Sunday. So I expected the type of game that happened yesterday. It's a divisional game, so it's going to be a little scrappy throughout the game, but you end up pulling through and winning by double-digit scores. That was to be expected. Joe Burrow, fantastic. He's Superman.
Yeah.
That photo will live in infamy in Bengals history, I'm sure, of him basically being parallel as he's throwing the football. Really cool to see him breaking NFL records. Jamar Chase breaking NFL record, or not NFL records, but breaking franchise records, his own record once again. And there's still 2 games left to play this season. So that's really, really fun. But there's no progress to be made in the playoffs, and that's the part that stings. You play so well.
Wait a minute now, Casey. Wait a minute.
What?
That's not true. I just said they had 4 things that had to happen over the weekend, and 2 of them happened. I mean, Denver lost when the weekend began, and the Bengals won their game. So they got 50% of what they needed, and there are still some things they need. But they got 2 things. If Denver would have won Thursday night, we're not having this conversation.
Right. No. You're right. I'm just saying, like, literally in the standings, they haven't made progress. They're still exactly where they were a week ago, which is still fine. They're still alive, and I'm happy about that. It's just, it stings just a little bit more that you just needed one more win. You just needed another win, and you'd be ahead of all those guys, and all you would have to do is take care of business against Denver. I digress on that.
No, but I'm with you. I said that to Luke yesterday when we were watching the game. I'm like, if you stop and think about when they put up that playoff panel all the time on games, right? If you just stop and think about New England, and I've gotten more furious about that game as this season has gone on, and I've said it multiple times on this show. If they had beaten, New England's won 3 games. That means since they were here in September, they've won 2 games and lost 12.
Yeah.
I mean, if they had won that game, that panel they put up about who's in and who's out, the Bengals would be 8-7. And a win over Denver this coming week would basically clinch them a spot in the playoffs. New England. And they did not show up ready to play. Everybody was healthy except for Mims. They don't show up. It's old news. But man, that's not only on Taylor, that's on the players. The defense showed up, the offense didn't show up. And as great as the offense has been, they're going to look back on that New England game, and that's the game. That's the game that will cost them the playoffs right there.
And speaking of the defense, just to talk a little bit more about the game this weekend, it was really awesome to see the rookies and the young guys finally step up and make plays. Chris Jenkins with 2 sacks, McKinley Jackson with the sack, Joseph Osai was all over the field, Cedric Johnson made a really good play. I felt like it should have been a strip sack, but I guess we'll take the intentional grounding call on that one play.
Yep.
Jordan Battle with the interception, Geno Stone with the interception. I mean, Von Bell making a good play. Like, the defense is starting to kind of like come alive, and I know it's the Browns, and I know that they're kind of packing it in. The offense isn't great, but there is something to be said about how they're getting these. It's not like DTR is just like throwing it into triple coverage. He's like throwing it. Guys are tipping the ball up and making plays. Von Bell punching the ball out on the goal line when it matters.
Yeah.
And offense and defensive line play across the league, it doesn't matter who you got there. You got to win your one-on-ones to be able to make a play. So they're making plays beating starters on the offensive line for the Browns. I think that's really good progress to see on this defense. Really awesome to see the defense kind of come alive for the first time all season.
You know, I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people around this town were beating down and wanting to fire Lou Anarumo. And look, maybe he'll get fired. I have no idea. And they have played awful teams here during this winning streak. Okay, so you have to clarify that a little bit, and especially on offense. Just terrible offensive teams. But really, ever since that Pittsburgh game, when they got lit up by an offense that hadn't scored against anybody all year long, they've played different personnel. You mentioned the young guys. That was certainly one of the major stories and highlights from the game yesterday, is how well those young guys on the defensive front played. And now Anarumo, with the same group of players, outside of these young guys getting a chance, is figuring out a way to play much, much better defense. I have said all along it would be a terrible mistake to fire Lou Anarumo. And basically, Joe Burrow said the same thing without using the word fire. People down there know what kind of coach he is. When you have crummy players, generally you're going to have a hard time not being a crummy defense. So, look, we could go on and on about the players. Okay, so what's left? We know that this Saturday is the last home game. We know this is the biggest game of the season. Every game is now, because they have to win them all. But they certainly, it starts Saturday against Denver, and then they need Denver to lose that last game of the year in Kansas City. And a lot of talk has been made about, if it gets to that scenario, would Mahomes play? Because the Chiefs can wrap up home field advantage throughout the playoffs this weekend against Pittsburgh. They can nail it down because they're 2 games up with 2 to go, but they own it. They got to win. Because they would lose a tiebreak if they lost their last 2 games and Buffalo won, because they lost at Buffalo. So a lot of people are saying, hey, look, Mahomes is not going to play in that game if they've got it wrapped up. I don't know about that. I'm not so sure about that, because remember, with a bye, you're off for 2 weeks. So I don't know if Patrick Mahomes is going to want to be off for what would then be 3 weeks leading up to a playoff game. I don't know. I mean, he's been nicked up, been banged up. He finds a way to still get on the field. Guy's unbelievable. But I would not bank on Mahomes not playing in that final game of the year. But neither here nor there. Luke, Casey, tell me about Kansas City, or tell me about Indianapolis, and tell me about Miami, because the Bengals need losses from each of those teams. 1 loss for each over the last 2 weeks now.
Well, I think the something's really interesting and a good resource for everyone in the chat. I'll actually link it after this. The New York Times has this awesome mathematical model where you can put in the exact result of every single game, and it'll tell you week by week, game by game, the Bengals' percentage to make the playoff. And that's the same with every single team that you select. So realistically, if we go into next week and we say the Bengals beat the Broncos, if the Giants are able to beat the Colts next week and the Browns beat the
Zero
Dolphins,
chance.
your playoff chances increase to 65%. So you're looking north of a flip of a coin. Let's just say the Colts take care of the Giants, which they will, but maybe the Browns steal one against the Dolphins. You're still only at a 20% chance. So I think it really is going to be one of those things where if they sneak in, let's move on from this topic because it's all going to work itself out and it's still only like a 6 or 7% chance that it happens. But if you can knock one off next week, you knock off the Broncos and you get one of the two to get upset, I really think that in Week 18 the Jets are going to be favorites against the Dolphins at home. It just sometimes there's some weird lines. I think a guy like Aaron Rodgers and his guys have the ability to go out and win a Week 18 game. They've been playing with no motivation all season long. You can see
Yeah.
it. It's pretty disgusting. We were talking about that yesterday, just how bad he and the Jets have been. But it's going to come down to the Colts like really getting upset because they play two of the worst, if not the two worst teams in the NFL in the Giants and Colts, or excuse me, the Giants and Jags. So it'll work itself out. I think we should jump in to maybe some college football playoff talk because that really did steal the weekend. And this weekend, if you're an avid Twitter user, even a generic one, your Twitter feed was blowing up with some heavy hitters clashing heads, people going after the Big Ten. Then the SEC got punished on Saturday night. So if you want to start talking about that Ohio State game, that was pretty interesting. And obviously, Casey, you're not slick there, throwing on that Notre Dame hat, man.
Yeah, I was going to wonder.
my-
Somebody asked in the chat if Casey was trolling Luke with that lid today. What's the deal? I've never seen you wear a Notre Dame hat.
Never.
I've been a fan of Notre Dame for quite a while. I've got some gear. I did a whole segment last year on Notre Dame being the college football playoff winners. I guess I just never wore it on Dialed In. I've wore this hat though a few times on the off the bench, and I guess I just thought I would wear this, show some pride in my team.
Okay.
Get out of
here. I love the fighting Irish. Love my leprechauns, man. What can I say?
Oh boy. Well, Luke, let's start with you, and then we'll get to some of this stuff about the matchups and maybe some of the reaction to the matchups more accurately. But first of all, what an unbelievable opportunity you had. You were actually on the field on Friday night in South Bend. How cool was that?
There is something so special about that town and that campus. And the second you step into Notre Dame Stadium, I mean, they do it right. There's a difference between, I mean, I've been so thankful and blessed to go to so many cool events through you on your side, just watching all of this type of stuff, whether it's the Final Four, NFL games, and whatever. To do something like that for a team that I've covered all year and the way the Notre Dame staff was to the media, the setup that they had, and then when you're on the field for kickoff, they increased the funding for like the lights, the smoke, and everything to make it more of like an entertainment scene. And it was not cheesy. It did not take away from the game. It was unreal being there. I think the matchup itself was quite underwhelming for how much that Friday night solo slot game was hyped up. And you got to fault Indiana for that. I still think that, Twitter wants to go crazy, say they don't deserve to be in the playoff. There certainly needs to be a distinction that the College Football Playoff Committee makes that says we are going to choose the best 12 teams or the most deserving 12 teams. Because if you don't pick Indiana in that spot, because I'm trying to draw up the scenario in my head. Everyone wants to go on Twitter and say Indiana shouldn't have been in. It was obvious that if Alabama or Ole Miss or South Carolina was in the playoff, all those teams who had Twitter fingers this weekend, if they were in the playoff, they're like, it would have been a closer game. I can personally be on the side where I said, yes, it probably would have been more competitive with Jalen Milroe under center in South Bend. And I cover Indiana. I think that's true, especially after watching it. But how can you look at Kurt Signetti and say, you beat a Nebraska team by 50 points that Ohio State took into the final possession of the fourth quarter at home in Columbus? You beat a Michigan team that Ohio State lost to at home in Columbus. You beat a Washington team by 2 scores that teams had trouble with all year. Granted, they were in the Final Four last year. So I get it. The schedule didn't work out. You scheduled the defending champs and you scheduled another playoff team and you scheduled Ohio State. That's not like some runaway and hide. We want to go 11-1 and make the playoff schedule, because we all know Indiana wasn't thinking about that outcome. So to say there's a world where Indiana should have been told, no, you can't even compete for a national championship, I feel like something like that would have had to happen with Florida State, where Curtis Rourke goes down for Indiana and you don't have a
Yeah.
quarterback anymore, for them to be told that. It just doesn't really make any sense, that argument. And I'm so tired of these SEC schools acting like top to bottom they are so deep. You're only deep because your bottom teams are beating your top teams. Tennessee beat Ole Miss. Oklahoma held Alabama's offense that would have done better against Notre Dame than Indiana's offense to 150 yards, 3 interceptions, less than 4 yards per play. Are you like, who are we kidding here, guys? Those arguments are just foolish. They're out of place. And the SEC fans are currently what the issue is with college sports right now, because it's creating a strict divide. And college sports are all about these stories: the Cinderella runs, the 10,000 student SMU schools sneaking into the college football playoff. What if they won that game? What if in 2 years from now we get that same scenario and one of these teams goes on a run? We're going to be making an ESPN 30 for 30 about that.
Look.
So
Go ahead, finish.
I don't get the argument. At the end of the day, the game was a blowout. There was 2 games or 3 games, 4 games in the first round. I don't really think the Clemson game was a blowout, but they covered a 13.5 spread for Texas. So the first round was underwhelming, but I've said from the start, the whole point of the 12-team playoff is, unlike the 4-team where one blowout ruins the entire thing, everyone would whine and complain and the playoff is over because it's only 3 games. The 12-team gives you a little bit more depth to where we can get some really good games down the stretch. And eventually the top 4, when it all works out to the semifinal rounds, is going to be the 4 best teams in the country. So we're in tune for a better playoff the rest of the way. There's still tons of issues with the seeding and format, though.
You know, the other thing, and we could save it for another day, but after everything that you just said about the Cinderella, and all those things are true, and when you have 68 teams in a basketball tournament, you have room for that. Look, these 4 games were blowouts. I think the only one that most people felt like was going to be highly competitive before any of the teams took the field was the Tennessee-Ohio State game, if nothing else because Tennessee is out of the SEC and all they do is run their mouth about how great they are and everything. And they're right in most cases. But look, the games were blowouts. And now all of a sudden, we brought it up last week, you're looking ahead to the next round of games. If I'm Oregon, I am just livid about all this. And, of course, they can't come out and say it because you sound like a ninny and you sound soft. But, of all of those teams that won in the first round games, and I'm not taking anything away from Notre Dame or Texas or we mentioned Ohio State, any of those teams that won in the first, Penn State. But for Oregon as the number 1 seed and the only team in college football to go undefeated, for their first game this weekend to be against the team, look, the entire year in college football, once you got past about the 5th week and Georgia lost for the first time, Oregon was number 1 and Ohio State was number 2 the entire year, the rest of the year until Ohio State lost to Michigan. And the only loss for Ohio State before that debacle against Michigan was at Oregon by 1 point. Maybe the game of the year in college football this year. It was phenomenal, had everything. And so now you got to play them again. And meanwhile, the Penn States of the world, don't disrespect, but it's Boise State. And Boise State might beat them by 30. I have no idea. But for Texas, now all of a sudden it's Arizona State. Are you kidding me? You have Ohio State and Notre Dame that are both of them in the rankings, not the seedings. In the rankings, they're in the top 6. And yet, their games are against Tennessee and Oregon. And then for Notre Dame, you're playing Indiana, but now you're playing Georgia. So Georgia's got to play Notre Dame. And I just think, look, but for the Trolls, and I can't believe how disappointing. You talk about sour grapes and looking really tired. Lane Kiffin more than anybody. I am just stunned that he would sit in his office or sit at his house and take the time to ridicule schools and to ridicule the committee about who they put in and how boring the games were and how uncompetitive the games were. I mean, look, it's one thing for stiffs like all of us to sit around and talk about it. This is the coach of one of the major college football programs in the country, allegedly. They spend a lot of money and they haven't won anything, ever. But here he is, neither is he for that matter. And I like Lane Kiffin, but I mean, give me a break. He got fired at USC. He quit on Tennessee. He's been at Ole Miss for 5 years, and they haven't won anything. So for him to get on there and criticize the Indianas, the SMUs, the Clemsons of the world, and then Joel Klatt, the outstanding analyst for Fox, finally had read enough. And he responded to Lane Kiffin, which took incredible balls by Joel Klatt, because he knows he's going to have to cover him again. He said, if your team was half as good at winning games as you are texting, you guys would have been in the college football playoff. And it's true. Lane Kiffin didn't utter another word after Tennessee got smoked by Ohio State. He did not utter a single word. It was only picking on the Indianas and the SMUs of the world because his team lost to Kentucky. I was really disappointed by that because he's a good coach and he's been around a long, long time. And he basically ridiculed those other programs and those kids for getting a chance, as you said, Luke, to be deserving of being there. His team did not deserve to be there. They might have been one of the top 12 teams in the country, but they didn't deserve to be there.
Well, the best part about the entire situation is that Lane Kiffin never acknowledged Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin. They were in the playoff. And with one game left, they lose at the University of Florida, who is currently in discussions of, do we keep Billy Napier or do we stick with the guy who wins about 4 to 6 games every year? And they go out and lose. And their Heisman candidate, Jackson Dart, turns the ball over a couple of times. They score less than 25 points, and they get embarrassed at Florida. So, yes, you can lose to Kentucky. That's the whole point of this. Let me remind you that Notre Dame is a national championship type of contender, and they lost to Northern Illinois. But everyone knows that you are allowed to have one really bad week, or in Georgia's case, if you get big wins, you can maybe have 2 losses. Strength of schedule, strength of loss matters, obviously. But the fact that they were in, it's not like you got robbed out. And on selection night, you were like, oh, we grinded at the end of the year. We played our way into this. We're playing good football. No, you lost in Gainesville to an organization that is probably calling Urban Meyer 5 times a day saying, please get us back on track because we still have never been the same. So I don't really get his point. We can move on from that topic. But the best part is it created a big Big Ten and SEC divide. And I think what the Big Ten showed this week is that they have 3 of the 4 best teams in college football right now. There's no reason for Penn State to be able to get a draw, to be 11-point favorites, and now the second round of the college football playoff, which they are. But the Big Ten does have 3 of the best 4. I think it's Ohio State is number 1 in my opinion. They're 3-point favorites against Oregon. How insane is that line?
It's unbelievable to me. I don't get it.
I think that's a testament to just how high the Buckeyes' ceiling is. And that's the argument with this entire playoff. Who has the best ceiling? Who has the most potential? Because if you're stringing together wins, you're getting better every week. You're getting this added rest that they're going to consistently get if you make these runs. I think Ohio State, out of all teams, has the highest ceiling. But we can move on and save that until the show right before. Nonetheless, the Big Ten had a good weekend. I know Indiana struggled mightily, but for the sake of that argument, the Big Ten beat up on the SEC in the opening round.
Well, they got him. They got him. They got him in one game. I mean, Penn State beat SMU out of the SEC. I mean, out of the ACC. So we'll see what happens this next round. The Georgia Notre Dame game is going to be a good game. Carson Beck, it looks like the starting quarterback, who's really been like this up and down. I mean, the great Carson Beck is great. The not so great Carson Beck is throwing interceptions to the other team morning, noon, and night. I don't know enough about this backup kid. I know this. He was recruited by the University of Georgia. Okay, so there's probably a real good chance. We knew he wasn't going to be on the field this year, pretty much no matter what, because he's a backup to a guy who just has been the leader of your program for the last 2 years and you won a national championship with. So they weren't going to bench Carson Beck going into the year. I think under most cases, the way Beck has performed this year, he probably should have been benched at times. But they found a way to play through. They go on and they get to and win the Big 12, the SEC championship game. And now here the backup will step in, and I can promise you this kid's a good player. Doesn't mean he's going to play good, but he's the backup at Georgia. So that's a big time game. Luke, you and I are going to try to swindle up some tickets out at that Boise State game against Penn State. Casey, are you now rooting for Penn State, by the way, the rest of the way through this playoff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm rooting for the Penn State Notre Dame game. That's what I'm hoping for. So I'm hoping for Penn State to beat Boise State, and I'm hoping for Notre Dame to beat Georgia, because then that just means I get a awesome championship where I can, have a team that I root for in the championship.
Okay.
I mean, I will admit, Penn State being the New Year's Eve game is kind of odd. Boise versus Penn State, and the fact that they're 10.5-point favorites doesn't look good.
Big number, man. Playoff. Big number.
It's a big number. Hopefully they take care of business. I don't have a lot of thoughts on it just yet because I'm going to wait for that day right before the playoffs to talk about it. But they got to handle business, right? You handle SMU as a double-digit favorite. You should handle business against Boise State too. But man, Ashton Genty, he can really create some issues there. So we'll see. We'll see about that game. I'm really excited about the Notre Dame Georgia game. I think they're both very similar teams in terms of just being really stout on defense. That's basically their calling card is defense. Really excited for that one. Very excited for that one. And then Oregon and Ohio State, the slate for the college football playoff is going to be great. I think Arizona State can be a frisky team too. It'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a lot of fun.
They're the hottest team right now, I think. You say hot. Oregon hadn't lost a game all year long. But Arizona State is a team that's coming on a massive roll right now, the way they finished the season. Incredible momentum. I'm not sure of any team that's in the playoff. I'm not sure if any team was hurt more than having a bye. I know you get to heal up and all that kind of stuff, but man, when you're playing like Arizona State was playing, and now it's going to be about 3.5 weeks between games for these teams that we had to bye, right? Arizona State won a conference title game. Oregon won a conference title game. And so, and we know Boise did too. And so all 4 of these first rounders did, Georgia as well. So it's going to be a while between games, which can be both good and bad. Any final thoughts, fellas, on any of the college football playoff stuff? The only other issue that I'm thinking that we could get into today would be some of the basketball over the weekend and UC beating Dayton. But I think football is center stage right now. And so we want to go through some of the picks we had last week. Luke, you want to do that?
Yeah, we can do that. I think, well, it was pretty generic from a picks perspective, in fairness. Coming off a 5-3 week, both you guys went 4-4. The biggest difference was the Encore Technologies United Dairy Farmers Square pick of the week out of the bottom 2. You guys took the Eagles instead of the Commanders. That wasn't necessarily one that I'm going to take a ton of credit for, considering Jalen Hurts got hurt in the first half of that game.
That's right.
But that might have been the game of the year. No one predicted Washington to turn the ball over 5 times and their rookie quarterback to score 5 touchdowns. I will say this. If you're going to talk about the NFL playoffs, that is a team in Washington that nobody wants to see. Because like Ohio State in the college football playoff, I think they have one of the highest ceilings. Because when they put it all together, they can score 45 on anybody, and their defense causes turnovers. So I think that was kind of my hit of the week or special story of the week that doesn't have anything to do with Cincinnati sports nonetheless. But I will say this. I watched a little bit of that Cincinnati Dayton game just through, like, I paused, started it because I was at the Notre Dame game and watched it all day Saturday on my drive back. I wasn't driving, by the way. And Cincinnati can guard. This is a Cincinnati basketball team for the first time in a long time in this city that, counting Xavier too, you have a team that is deserving to be in the top 25, and you have a team that could absolutely make a run at the NCAA tournament and at getting a really good seed in the NCAA tournament because they're
Yep.
putting the pieces together, and we know they have the offensive talent. They're deep. They have shooters. They have guys who can go off the dribble. They have guards who are quick. They run in transition, and they are well coached. So I'll keep it brief. It's still early on in the year, and we're really going to get into college hoops come January, February, right before the dance. But nonetheless, playing in the Big 12 is going to be massive for the Cats. Let's see how they can hang in there. But this run of picking up a couple wins, getting a big ranked win against Dayton, huge for the resume early on in the year. And I think this is going to be a really fun season to follow the Bearcats because it has been so long for such a good basketball town and city to not have a team that we're just talking about, please make the tournament, please just squeeze your way in. I think Cincinnati's going to make the tournament with ease and really go after some people if they do.
Yeah, you look at excuse me, the Big 12 and what they've got coming up. I mentioned, look, every game we know in the Big 12 is probably going to be a tough game. It's a great league. You can make the argument that during the regular season, it's the best conference in the country. Now, the SEC looks to be the strongest early on this year, no debate about that. But the Big 12 is still loaded. You've got Kansas State on the road where you got to start. I mentioned on December the 30th. You've got Arizona coming here the 4th, but it's not the same Arizona team. But make no mistake, they still got nothing but 3 and 4 and 5-star players. It's Arizona. They're just off to a slow start. But you've got Baylor on the road. Baylor's always good. And then Kansas comes here. I think when on January the 11th, and that's going to be an afternoon game at 2 o'clock, Kansas comes to UC. And I think by that time, UC is going to be ranked in the top 10 because I don't think they're going to lose to Kansas State or Arizona or Baylor. I think they're going to win all those games. That would put them at 13-1. And now here comes Kansas to the shoe. It'll be one of the biggest games in recent memory in this city as far as UC is concerned because Xavier's played some big games in the Big East and been good when they played them. So that'll be fun. And I'm with you. I think UC's got the makings of a really good team. They got to stay healthy, but they're big. They're athletic. I love James, even though he hasn't had, great games necessarily. I think he's an incredible leader. Skillings is getting better. He led them in scoring yesterday. And he's their best all-around player, Skilling. So, I think it's going to be a fun year for UC basketball. I am fired up. Speaking of college basketball real quick, we talked about Ohio State's football team. What in the world happened for Ohio State's basketball team against Kentucky? Can you explain that? Luke, Casey, anybody? How did they lose to Auburn by 50 and then turn around and beat Kentucky by 20?
All right, this is a lame answer to your question, and I don't think the chat's going to like this because they're Kentucky fans, and I'm sure there's a lot of Ohio State fans in here. I think if you're going to compare it to the Auburn game, one thing that it proves is Auburn is worlds better than everyone else in college basketball right now. I don't know.
Wait a minute. Hold on. You're saying they're worlds better than undefeated Tennessee?
Absolutely. I mean, it's two different play styles, so you're going to see it, and it's going to be really cool because it's in the same conference. Tennessee is the best defensive team in college basketball right now, and it seems like you're suffering to get a basket on that team. Auburn, it feels like, is playing a different game than everyone else on the offensive end of the floor. I mean, they have 5 guys that can stroke it from deep. If you close out on them, they're going to make boom, 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 3 quick passes and get a layup. They are playing as fluid of an offensive play style as I've seen in a long time. And guys, I'm looking at the calendar. It is not even Christmas yet. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. But whatever these guys did in the offseason, they are not just ramping up. They are not just starting their season. They are in go mode right now. And the fact that they're able to beat the Buckeyes, they turn around and murder Purdue yesterday. They are knocking off everybody in college hoops right now. But to talk about the Buckeyes, you got to give them credit. I mean, you're playing a top 5 team in the country, and you win by 20. Bruce Thurton goes for a 30-piece Ohio State in the
Yeah.
guard spot is pretty volatile. If they're shooting it well and getting the rim, they
Yeah.
can beat you like that. But Ohio State has kind of scuffled in some way. I mean, they got beat by 24 to Maryland. They're an up and coming young team, but to lose to an unranked Pitt, there's a lot of disparity in college hoops. I love the argument that there shouldn't even be a top 25 in college basketball until the new year because anything happens in the first
Yeah, that's a
couple,
good point.
10 to 15 games.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. But it's gonna be a fun college basketball season, and Lord knows we're gonna have all the time in the world to talk about that. Casey, anything else on your mind before we wrap it? Let's get to our picks real. We covered that. We're fine. We're fine on the picks because we're not doing the show on Thursday, and we're gonna miss NFL picks for this coming weekend by not doing the show on Thursday. But that's okay. We will be back Monday to pick the college games and then going into the final week of the regular season. So no show on Thursday. That's right, Everett Henry. No show on Thursday. Casey, anything on your mind before we get out of here today?
Anything on my mind? We already went over the Bengals playoff chances, what needs to happen. Other than that, it's been exactly what we had asked for as Bengals fans. We just wanted it to be interesting in the final part of the season. I didn't want to have to come in here every Monday and go, I didn't watch the game. It doesn't matter. We're just playing for draft positions. I didn't want to have to do that. I'm glad that we're past that point. College football playoff. The only thing I had was just Penn State being the New Year's Eve game. I don't understand that whatsoever.
Well, what they had to do was they couldn't play 4 games in one day. In college football, if you remember, the last couple of years, all these TV executives and these, whether it's streaming, whether it's a broadcast, they're all looking for kind of their day and time to own. Okay, and that's what they're all doing. For the NBA, forever, right? Christmas Day belonged to the NBA. And the NFL comes walking in the door and says, are you kidding me?
See ya.
Christmas Day, everybody's home. We're going to step into that time slot, and we'll take our chances going against the NBA. Well, New Year's Eve was a day nobody wanted. Nobody wanted that. And college football took a lot of heat about 4 years ago when they played one of their playoff games on New Year's Eve. Well, it turns out their ratings were pretty good. And college football has always owned New Year's Day. And I thought it was a stroke of genius to make sure of all these second-round games, the game that is going to feel like historical college football is that Ohio State-Oregon game. I'm not saying it's going to be the best game, but for all of us old enough to remember New Year's Day, Big Ten versus Pac-10 back in the day before it was Pac-12 and all that kind of thing, at the Rose Bowl in Los Angeles, beautiful weather, big-time players, national championship implications all those years in that game. That's the game. And Casey, that's the only reason they're playing that game.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of my point is I wanted to watch that game over Penn State and SMU. It's going to be a complete stinker I'm predicting it to be a bad game, but who knows? Maybe it ends up being a good game. I would imagine you'd want your better games there in that time slot, but maybe I just don't understand the money aspect and the viewership aspect of it. So, anyways, other than that, Tom,
what time is that kickoff? What time is that kickoff? I'm checking my phone here real quick. I think that if I were betting, I would bet the Rose Bowl game is probably a 4 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock game, something like that.
The Rose Bowl is at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, 5 o'clock. Yeah.
The Notre Dame Georgia is the night game. Yeah, I think it's.
So you got Texas and Arizona State, which is weird. They're going to be playing. You have neither team that's in the Eastern time zone, and both of them are going to Atlanta for a 1 o'clock kickoff on New Year's Day. That's a weird time, man. 1 o'clock. Then you have Ohio State, Oregon at 5. Notre Dame, Georgia. New Year's night at 8:45 p. That's quite the back end, a doubleheader back to back. Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, Notre Dame. There will be incredible monster ratings for that.
Something to look forward to. Little late Christmas present. Yeah, the playoff is going to work itself out. The expanded format shouldn't be debated. That I think this is better than the 4 team, but they got issues. I mean, you're getting another. Texas is back-to-back 13.5 point favorites, and they lost the SEC championship. Let's look at the winner of the SEC championship. Notre Dame is a better team than Arizona State. Then you look at the Big Ten. We can have this argument all day. I mean, the fact that Oregon is the only undefeated, the overall 1 seed, and they're underdogs
Yep.
in the second round compared to the team that they beat. That's 10 and a
Yep.
half point favorites. Unreal. It needs help. But we're gonna get great. We're gonna get a great Final Four, a really good Final Four.
Oh, I don't think there's. I think you're fine. Yeah, there's no doubt. It's going to be potentially a phenomenal Final Four. There's no doubt about that. Unless you get the upset. And look, I'm not cashing. I'm not throwing in the towel on Boise, I mean, Lord knows I did the Boise game years ago when they beat Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl, and Oklahoma had about 9 guys that played in the NFL for about 10 years on that team, including Gerald McCoy and Adrian Peterson. The center for Boise State back in those days weighed 250 pounds. So, look, I'm not going to count them out. And Arizona State, the same thing. They've got good players. And I can promise you one thing. Their defense can't be nearly as bad as Clemson's. I cannot believe we watched a Clemson. That was Clemson defense. Because they have ranked in the top 10 in total defense for 12 years in a row under Dabo Swinney. Top 10, 12 years in a row. And that was one of the worst defensive teams I've ever seen in my life in a college football game over the weekend. But we digress. All right, fellas. Everybody have a great start to your week. More importantly, have a wonderful Christmas. Casey, it'll be your first, knowing that a little Casey, little McAllister is on the way. Is everybody celebrating that on these early Christmas days and nights at your house?
Yeah, I've received a few baby gifts already. Lots of
like
Bengals
what?
onesies.
Like what? Tell me one thing you got already.
Well, a lot of Bengals onesies. I'm gonna have my child decked out in Bengals gear from head to toe, Monday through Sunday, if I want. At this point, I got so many big. I'm not even kidding. I've got like 5 of them already for Christmas. I guess
that is awesome.
Family knows I'm gonna really want to dress up my kid for Bengals days, but I've got plenty of options now. So that's one of my favorites. Also got a couple swaddles for that are soccer themed, more for Alex's side. But yeah, it's
that child better like sports, Casey.
I sure hope so. It'll be tough to live in my household without liking sports. That's
or it'll be like one of those kids you just see walking around with nothing on. Right?
Yeah. They'll just be a Nicky boy. Yeah,
that's exactly right. Luke and I saw a kid used to run around. What was his name, Luke?
Baby Dimitri.
Baby Dimitri. This little kid would walk up and down the street in this neighborhood in Sarasota, where we'd stay with some friends of ours. This kid never had any clothes on. Baby Dimitri was his name. He just walked around the neighborhood and letting it all hang out. Luke, any thoughts for you before we say goodbye with Christmas upon us in 3 days?
I think in the Christmas spirit, we should do a little send-off of the show, especially because we're not doing a show on Thursday. We can skip the picks, we can skip the gambling, but we can never skip the move. So I'll ask Casey first, what is your move with your holiday time off? What could be the move? What are you doing?
What could be the move?
Oh, that's good.
I have a lot of Christmas parties still left to go to on Alex's side of the family. We already wrapped up McAllister's side. So I'm going to be doing that Christmas Eve. I'll be going to my in-laws. We're going to be celebrating Christmas there. Lots of Christmas breakfasts. That is one of my favorite things I look forward to, is having a savory Christmas breakfast.
Wow.
Geta, bacon, sausage, biscuits and gravy. I know it sounds kind of lame for that to be the move, but it is one of the all-time favorite things I look forward to every year. And then I got a drone for Christmas on my side of the family. I'm going to probably take that bad boy out, maybe do some family photography with it, some interesting, cool shots with that. Those are all the things I'm going to be doing, and watching football, of course, on Christmas Day. I can't forget the NFL. Those are all my moves for the holiday.
Okay.
What about you guys?
Very nice. Very nice. Luke, what about you?
I could be generic and say what I say every single week on this show, where I say I'm going to watch football, but I'll try to be a little more wholesome and family oriented here. I'm really pumped up. My dad, or obviously you, Dad, has a bowl game.
Yeah.
The Gin and Juice Bowl. Snoop Dogg is a big sponsor,
Yep.
so he'll be there. I'll be able to meet Snoop, hopefully. That might be one of the cooler things I've done. But just to be back and go on another trip with my dad, we used to do this all the time. I'm really looking forward to it, to be able to chase that same career path, and kind of a Christmas present to go out to Arizona, where I was born and lived for a couple years during the Diamondbacks days. So to go there, watch some college football, and then I think we're going to try to go, like my dad said earlier, to that New Year's Eve Fiesta Bowl between Penn State and Boise State. So you can't go anywhere without sports, at least in this household. So I'm really looking forward to that. But before I do that, I got to go in this drawer that I'm looking at right now and try to grab a bunch of ones, maybe a couple fives if I'm lucky, and maybe go get my family Christmas presents like right now, the second this show ends, and a haircut. So in specific, yeah, I got a lot of stuff to do before the holiday.
Well, thank you, Luke, and I'm so excited too that our family gets to go out this bowl game. Casey, I don't know if I talked about this, but I'm doing this Snoop Dogg Bowl, right? And Miami of Ohio is playing in the game, so I can't wait to see Coach Walker. I just think he's a great guy. Coach Martin, he's a great guy. The old Coach Walker, God rest his soul. Coach Martin is such a good guy, and I'm looking forward to being able to meet with him on Friday. But they're playing Colorado State. Should be a pretty good game. But the game is sponsored by Snoop Dogg. And so he is going to be in the booth broadcasting the game with me for the third quarter and half of the fourth quarter. This is on December the 28th. Now, the Bengals play about an hour and a half later. So for a lot of you, you're probably not going to click over. Okay? But Snoop Dogg's coming in the booth. Dr. Dre is coming in the booth. And Martha Stewart is coming in the booth. Right? So that's going to be really cool to have a chance to get back and broadcast a bowl game again. A great blessing. Thankful for that. But at least this bowl, and let's be honest, outside of the college football playoff bowls, the rest of them are just games where you got to have some rooting interest or you probably don't care, right? A lot of guys in the transfer portal, whatever. At least this game has Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and Martha Stewart in the booth. So there's something there. So Fred, thanks. He says he's always going to be dialed in. Everett, Coach Martin knows exactly what I say about Miami. Those guys know. It's all in good fun. I mean, they all know it's in good fun. All right, so that's a move for me. Going to Arizona, getting a chance to spend time with family. Very excited about Christmas. I love Christmas Eve. I love going to church Christmas Eve. I love us having dinner Christmas Eve, Christmas morning. There's nothing more magical. Casey, as you will know, good Lord willing, this time next year, there's nothing more magical than waking up Christmas with your family and kids. Okay, that's going to do it for us. The boys are standing by. The boys, Merry Christmas to each and every one. They're calling me from Snoop. It's Snoop's camp. It's Snoop. Snoop, what's going on? I'll get back to you in a minute. All right, guys, have a Merry Christmas. God bless you all. And we'll see you on Monday, a week from today, getting ready for the college football playoff. Be well.